All right. Hello. Uh-oh, am I echoing? There we go. All right. Hello there. My name is Courtney. I am a librarian at our Gaines Township branch, and you may notice that we are missing a very important person for what we're reading tonight because it is a Stump the Librarian takeover.
Yay!
For those of you that don't know, KDL launched a podcast this summer called Stump the Librarian. It features me, Courtney, my co-host Emily, who's next to me,
Hi.
and our librarian behind the computer, or a producer, Jill. So hello, ladies. Are you ready to talk about some books?
Very much, yes.
All right. Woo. Should we tell them about the podcast first, though?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
So our podcast goes live tomorrow. Our next episode 7. So there are 7 episodes that you can binge listen to or take your time listening to. In our podcast, we answer questions. Ladies, what has been your favorite question so far that we have answered? It can be one that you answered or one that I answered or one that Emily answered. I stumped ya.
You're stumping us right now. I feel like because it's closest to my heart, I liked the jam and jelly question.
I knew you were
I
going
love
to say
making
that
jam
one.
and jelly. So,
and I think for me it was the lemon question. I feel like I listened about lemons.
That was a good one. For me, it was probably the one. It was Nolan's question about what animal can survive, what sea creature can survive being at the lowest part of the ocean. I totally reworded that wrong. But that's my favorite. So we usually answer 3 questions. There are questions that we get from patrons. A lot of them have been from KDL staff kiddos. So shout out to all the KDL staff kids that have submitted questions. We appreciate that. What else do we talk about in our podcast?
We talk about what we're reading.
We do.
Jill always gives us an interesting fact, which is a lot of fun.
She does. They're always good. So they're about 30 minutes long. So, if you have a commute to work, great thing to listen to. We originally did it with kids in mind, but I think if our coworkers are any sign, I think that anyone would like to listen to it. We've had a lot of adults that we know that have listened to it, but let's get down to business.
Let's do it.
We are here to talk about books. So I like to read mostly I read chapter books. I read YA. I've been reading some adult fiction and some nonfiction, but I typically listen to books recently. I've done a lot of audiobooks. Emily, what do you like to read?
I like YA. I do lately. I've been reading a lot of chapter books for our younger patrons, which has been a lot of fun, and then also a lot of adult books, which is interesting because they're opposite ends of the spectrum. But I think I've also been listening to them more than I have actually been reading them lately as well. I have a pretty long commute to work, so I can get through some good books.
I don't have a long commute, but I go on dog walks, which is where I listen to my audiobooks. All right, Jill. Yeah. Jill likes to read books that make her cry.
That's true. I do. And in fact, I tried to be careful, not only pick super sad books to talk about today, but odds are most of the books I've been reading lately make me cry. I do read really widely though. I think middle grade chapter books are my favorite, but I do read YA. I do read adult. So I read a little bit of everything, and I read in a lot of genres too. I like fantasy. I like realistic fiction. I love nonfiction, especially like memoirs or biography. And I even get into mysteries just a tiny bit though. No spooky stuff, which I know you two do a little bit more of.
Yes.
No spookies for me.
Most of my books, I think all of my books today are spooky. I think also because it's the season.
It's spooky season.
For spooky, so
I like it to be just spooky in a nice way. Nice spooky.
I feel like eerie is probably the closest you get to spooky.
I think that's true.
Like weird things.
Mm.
All right. Well, I'm going to talk about one book that I actually listened to. Surprise, surprise. But I did buy the book. And you know that a librarian loves a book when they buy a book, even though I did not read this physical book. And it's John Green's Anthropocene Reviewed, and Jill, obviously, big fan. So for those of you that don't know who John Green is, him and his brother Hank, they do a podcast called Dear Hank and John. John is also a YA author. This is his first foray into
as
adult.
is Hank.
As is Hank. Hank also writes he writes books too, but Hank did like more sciencey things before.
Yeah.
But they've been big YouTubers, and their podcast, Dear Hank and John, or Dear John and Hank, depending on who's introing the podcast, is kind of a little bit of inspiration for what we do. They answer way more questions than we do. And they
go in depth a little bit more. Like they talk about it.
They do.
A little bit more.
Theirs is a little bit longer than ours, and they give dubious advice. So their answers are not typically researched, although sometimes they'll do some like Googling on the fly. I think one of my favorite episodes in that was when they were trying to figure out how to spell per usual, like per usual, like shorthand for per usual, and it was just they just kept like typing back and forth in their Google document, like different spellings. And I think a linguistic people ended up like adding them on Twitter. Anyways, so this is John's first nonfiction, and it's just a collection of essays based on his podcast. So he does have a podcast. I believe it's ended or it's close to ending, called Anthropocene Review. And he just writes reviews about the human experience. Like he wrote a review on sunsets. He wrote a review on Diet Dr. Pepper. He wrote a review on a moment in soccer.
Teddy bears.
Teddy bears.
That was one of my favorites.
That was the sunset one, I think, was one of my favorites. And yeah, it's like one of the quotes from it is, it can sometimes feel like loving the beauty that surrounds us is somehow disrespectful to the many horrors that also surround us. But mostly I think I'm just scared that if I show the world my belly, it will devour me. And so I wear the armor of cynicism and hide behind the great walls of irony and only glimpse beauty with my back turned to it through the clawed glass. One of my favorite ones. And he gives sunsets 5 stars. So he also ranks them on like a 1 to 5 star rating. It took him a while to get anything to 5 stars. Like he kept rating things close, and I was like, maybe he doesn't give anything 5 stars.
It is hard to give things like the most amount of stars because then
I know. I always like
you're comparing it to
on Goodreads. I always, because you can't do half stars, and so I always round up. So I have a lot of things that are 4 stars, and then in the description, I'm like, actual rating 3.5. So I'm like, it wasn't quite 4 stars, but I don't want to put it as a 3 star because I want the author to like get into that. But so that's one book that I've really liked listening to. And again, John reads it. So it's just, I clearly like listening to him talk. For some reason. So Emily, what's a book? We'll have some other books to talk about, but what's a book that you have read and enjoyed?
Well, it's nothing like the book you just talked about.
This is the bar high.
You did. I just read a J book called Scary Stories for Young Foxes. And Jill, I don't think you'd like it. It actually was scarier than I thought it would be. Part of it I listened to, and I listened to it at home in the dark, and I honestly was a little bit scared. So if you have a child who like really likes spooky stuff and can handle that, this is a great book for them. But it's essentially about 7 fox babies, and they're in their den with their mom, and their mom is telling them stories, but they want scarier stories. And the mom is like, I'm not going to do that. We're going to go to bed. And don't you dare sneak out to the bog to listen to the storyteller after I go to sleep. And so, of course, these 7 kits go to the storyteller. And over the course of a night, he tells them 7 stories about foxes. My favorite part probably of the whole book is that Beatrix Potter makes an appearance in the book, which is fantastic because she did in reality taxidermy a lot of her subjects.
She did.
So she is like a part of of this book, which is of course terrifying to young foxes. And as the story goes on, there's like little snippets between each story that the storyteller tells, where you get the reactions of the little foxes, and that's kind of fun. And slowly, one by one, they like are leaving this storyteller until there's just one left who's listened to all the stories. It was really cool. I think what I would liken it to is the book Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Did you ever read that as kids? Yeah. I don't know.
Read it.
You read it?
Yeah.
I don't know if it was the pictures that scared me the most in that book or the actual stories, but I remember being terrified of that book as a kid, but also loving it, thinking it was the greatest thing. So
no, I couldn't even watch when I was a kid. I remember, don't know if you were a Nickelodeon kid, but Are You Afraid of the Dark would come on whenever I was watching. Terrifying. And I would be like, bye, I'm going upstairs because I'm not watching, because it was at my grandparents' house. They had cable. We did not have cable. And as soon as that would come on, I would go upstairs because I was like, this isn't for me.
So was it like, would you want to watch it, but then as it was starting, you'd be like, oh, this is too much for me?
No, I think I knew that I was a fraidy cat. And
I'd always watch
nothing wrong with that. You know your limits.
I agree.
That was mine. I definitely watch scarier things now than I did when I was a kid. But okay, Jill, what's your non-scary?
I listened and read scarier things when I was a kid, and now I'm like, pass on all of that.
I think at this point, the world has jaded us that things just seem more intense than they did when we were children, but that's okay.
Maybe. Okay, so I'm doing a reread of something that I honestly love, and it's Cinder. It's an IA series, and my daughter is 12, almost 13, and she is reading this book right now, and I was like, I want to read it so we can kind of read it together, reread it so we can read it together. And I forgot how much I want to keep reading and find out what's going on. I just started it today, and I'm
oh my goodness.
I just couldn't stop. Like every moment I had a free moment, I was just like, because it's just so exciting. And I remember the first time I read it, I really remember how I felt about it, because I think that I have always liked fantasy and science fiction, but it had been a while since I had read anything fantasy and science fiction. And someone at our branch recommended this series to me. And so I was like, okay, I kind of want to get back into reading YA, and I kind of want to get back into reading sci-fi fantasy. And so I'm going to try with this. And getting immersed into that sci-fi and fantasy world where the world is different than the world that we know. When you first get into a book, it's so confusing. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, where it's like, what's happening in this world? What are the laws of this world? What is going on? And I just remember starting this book and being like, I don't understand what's going on. I do not like this. And then by the end of the first chapter, I'm like, I don't care that I don't know what's going on. I'm all in. So I want to be careful, because I don't want to give too much away if you haven't read this series, because there are so many layers to it. It's definitely dystopian. So it takes place in the future that looks different. It's on Earth, but it looks different than what our real Earth looks like now. And also, I can tell you this without it being a spoiler, a slanted fairy tale. Maybe you can guess who Cinder is. Cinderella.
I see a shoe.
Yeah. So that's fun to me. I love twisted fairy tales. And so that element of it is really exciting. And the rest of the series, each one is a different twisted fairy tale character, which is really fun. And then there's just other elements in it that I don't want to give away, because I think you kind of discover those as you start.
Have you read the whole series, Bill?
Oh, yeah, I have. I put all the books on hold today, kdl.org. I was like, I need the next one right away.
Yeah, for sure. I just started a book, so I can't say much about it, but it's a dystopian. It's Sky Hunter by Marie Lu, and she writes a lot of science fiction, fantasy, And yeah, I'm so confused about what's happening. And Libby says that I'm 17% through the 12-hour audiobook. So I have a lot of dog walks to go on still. But yeah, I'm just like, they're talking about like the Federation. There's a war going on. It's a dystopian. And I'm just like, I have no idea what is happening in this story yet. Someone's already died, and I'm just like, gosh, this is all escalating quickly. But
you know, the nice thing about getting just like investing into a fantasy sci-fi world is especially when it's a series, and it usually is a series, is that you have 4, 5, 8 books to like really just get lost in that world. And that's what's so fun about science fiction and fantasy, but it is really hard to get in it the first time.
But isn't it kind of cool that like once you're like in it, then that just becomes the reality there. And then when you're on to the second book, you have that history of like what happened in the first book in the world that they're living in. It's really cool.
Yeah, for sure. I just read another fantasy, and it's kind of spooky. I feel like it would have been spookier. It's a J, so it's a middle grade novel. It's called Cece, Rios and the Desert of Souls. And it's very interesting. And I feel like had I read it, it would have been spookier than like listening. I don't know if like for everyone else when you listen to audiobooks, but I'm usually doing something else. So like I said, I'm walking my dog, I'm cooking dinner, I'm coloring, I'm usually doing something else. So my mind isn't always 100% on the audiobook. So I miss some things because I talked to another friend of ours who works at Granville, Katie Lawrence, and she said something about it being really dark. And I was like, I didn't think it was that dark. I mean, it does start out with so there's 2 sisters, there's Cece and her older sister, and they're preparing for this festival. These people are like, have like fiery souls. And I thought that was a euphemism at first, but I think it's like literal fire. But Cece was cursed by this spirit. So she has a water soul. And so her sister is trying to teach her how to like embrace the fire in her, and it's just not working. And so they like get into a little fight, and she like goes off into this place that I like equivalent to like Scar's lair. You know, when Scar tells Simba, like, don't go over there. Like I feel it to that area. That's like what I was picturing in my mind. And so she goes, of course. And of course she runs into one of these bad spirits, and I can't think of how to say it. It's a Spanish word, and like there were a lot of Spanish words that I was like, I need to see this written down to like be able to figure out how to say it. But he's like a bride stealer. So he steals her sister and like takes her away. And so that is dark. That is dark. And then Cece, she has to be a bruja. So she like needs to figure out how to get her sister back. And the way to get to where this man, this like dark spirit is to become a bruja, which is like a magical being. She has like the soul of one of the, oh gosh, I can't think of the word, what it is, but they have like the soul of this magical creature. And so they fight, they like make the creatures fight. So she gets the soul, and like she has to learn how to become a bruja, but she doesn't actually want to be a bruja. She just wants to save her sister. And so it's kind of like one of those like sort of chosen ones, but like she doesn't realize that she's a chosen one until later. But it was definitely a good book. It's by Cala Riviera. It's really good. It's good for spooky season. So I think, Jill, you could read it. It's not too spooky.
I think I could. Wait, was that one J you said, or that was YA?
Yeah, it's a J.
It's a J.
It's a J. She's 12 going on 13. So
okay. Yeah, that does sound like something I could handle.
Yeah, maybe. It's really good because it's a good read alike for our friends who like Percy Jackson and like that mythology type thing, but it's not a Rick Presents, so it's not like
awesome.
It's not in that series, which there's a couple of them that are like that we have in our collection that are based on mythology or just urban legends type of thing that aren't part of the Rick Presents. So Yeah. Emily, what else have you been reading during the spooky season?
More spooky books. I need to apologize. I don't have any of these books to show anyone. So you'll have to just look them up on kdl.org so you can put them on hold.
Oh, yeah.
But the book that I read before, Scary Stories for Young Foxes, was There's Someone Inside Your House. And Courtney, I think you said you read this one too.
Yes, it's one of my favorites. I read it
spooky
2 or 3 years ago. It's not for Jill.
No, it's definitely not for Jill. It
No.
It's funny because I think it has like all the essence of like a mystery, but then there is murder in it, and when the murder happens, they describe what the murder is.
Yeah, it's a trigger warning for anyone who's wanting to read There's Someone Inside Your House by Stephanie Perkins, because it gets gory.
It gets gory, yeah.
She does not shy away from describing it.
No, which I was surprised about. But it's essentially about this girl who has moved to this new school, and you can tell that there's something that is like off about her past, but you don't know what it is. And she's afraid that the other students are going to find out what this thing is. Meanwhile, there's somebody killing, there's somebody
on the side.
Whatever. There's somebody killing people at her school. And she's kind of nervous the whole time that this person knows what she did in her past, or they're going to find out, or that she will get targeted because of it. So yeah, there's some teen deaths, murders that happen. But it is, I like how it's written. It was a good read in that way. It a little bit reminded me of Anna Dressed in Blood. Have either of you read those? It was like that one's like, again, like it's a kind of like your average, like mystery kind of spooky story. And then the murder happens and no detail is spared. So definitely both good books, but not for Jill. Not for Jill.
Not for Jill.
We need a reading list that is called Not for Jill.
Yeah. I have a close friend who reads similar to Jill. And there's a funny story about that. So I had There's Someone Inside Your House on our staff pick shelf at Gaines as one of my staff picks. And she came in with her daughter, and they both know me. And they went over the staff picks, and they were like, oh, let's see which ones Miss Courtney does. And her daughter Betsy was like, oh, take that one. And it was There's Someone Inside Your House. And my friend Claire, she cannot read scary things either. So when she told me, I was like, oh yeah, don't read that. Just bring it back. Bring it back to whatever library, but don't read it.
Isn't it cool that there's just something for everybody? That's the cool thing about the library. And so it's all right that I can't read.
Absolutely. It's okay. And I will say that I do get scared and often have to put these books down and like read a J book for a little bit that isn't spooky.
You need a nice warm
cleanse my palate. That's right.
That's right.
All right, Jill, give us do you have a warm hug book?
Oh, golly.
Or a sad
the
book?
next one I was going to share is not a warm hug book, but
that's okay.
I could do a warm hug book instead. I got a whole stack here. I got too many.
Too many books. Pick whatever one is speaking to your heart right now.
Yes.
Oh, I love that. That's so nice. Okay, well, I have, I'm just going to flash this one because I'm going to teaser. I shared this one on the podcast, right? Did I share this one on the podcast? In your shoes?
Oh, you did. Yeah.
Okay, so listen to the podcast for my thoughts on that one. Okay, here's the one I want to share, though. It's The Cat I Never Named. And this is, I would not consider this a feel-good book, but it isn't.
The title alone makes me want to cry, Joe.
Oh, it's so, I definitely cried. But can I just tell you that I don't know why. I thought this was going to be a World War II book. So it's a memoir. It is a teen memoir, a true story. And I put it on hold because I thought it was a World War II book, and it came, and I look at the cover and I was like, this isn't World War II. And it's not. This book resonated with me a lot for a few reasons. One, because there's a cat on the cover, and I do love a cat, especially a pretty calico cat. But it's a book that took place in my own life. It was set in the mid to late 90s. It's about the war in the Bosnia, Croatia, Serbia, and it took place when I was in high school. And when I was reading this young woman's story, who she's my age, and she wrote the story about her growing up years there in this terrible war that was happening there. And I just was thinking about how clueless I was, as a teenager, not knowing that this was happening on the other side of the world. So for that reason, it really resonated with me. And also because my grandparents came from Croatia. So before this war happened, but that's, you know, where my heritage is from. And so just reading this was really, it made me really sad to see how hateful people can be to each other over things like religion, which is primarily what this was, and culture and those things. And that made me really sad, but also how resilient people can be, how her family survived conditions that I cannot imagine surviving. I thought this book was really, really well written. I loved it, even though it was hard to read, and I certainly cried, as Courtney knows.
As expected.
As I do. Sometimes even when it's happy, I cry. So, okay.
This is true.
That's good. Let those emotions out, Jill.
Happy tears, sad tears, whatever. But yeah, this one, it was so, it didn't even feel like nonfiction. It was so story.
Oh, that's nice. And it's a novel, because it almost looks like the cover makes me think it's a graphic
novel. Yeah,
it is. I know. Isn't it a beautiful cover? It really
does. It's a really nice
graphic novel. But no, it is a novel, not a graphic novel. Although I love graphic novels too.
Everyone loves a good graphic novel. Well, those are the books that we have been reading or have read. Again, I'm Courtney. I'm joined with Emily and Jill, and we have a podcast called Stump the Librarian, which if you see on the screen now, that is the URL that will take you to our webpage, where if you have a question that you think can stump us, you can submit it there. You can also find all of our other episodes there. They're also on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, really wherever you listen to podcasts. You can just search Stump the Librarian and you should find it. And we're not going to tell you if we have been stumped. You'll have to listen to the podcast episodes to find out if anyone has stumped us yet. And don't forget to ask us the question. So thank you so much for joining us. Penny, we missed you.
Miss you, Penny.
We'd love to know what you're reading. And yeah, we'd love to know what whoever's watching this, is reading as well. So let us know in the comments on Facebook or YouTube what you're reading this spooky season. Is it something spooky? Are you like it, Emily, where you like a spooky thing? Are you like Jill, where you don't like spooky things, you like a sad thing? Or are you like me, where you like something somewhere in the middle? But yeah, until next time, we'll see ya.
Bye.
Bye.